I show up how I needed, and I couldn't find me. So I became who I needed when I was really at my lowest point.
Hello and welcome back to the Amanda Kaufman Show, and we're already having a good time. I've got Lisa Katona Smith here joining us today, and let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. So, Lisa is the founder of Parallel Recovery, and she's a nationally recognized voice in the landscape of family recovery. And she's a certified peer recovery specialist, a TEDx speaker, and the author of the forthcoming book, Parallel Recovery, a guide for those who love someone struggling with substance use disorder. Lisa blends over 20 years as a master level educator with personal experience navigating a loved one's addiction, and she is known for her clarity, emotional depth, strategic insight, being a genuinely awesome person. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
My pleasure. I loved obviously getting to know you as a human, just like totally amazing. But something that really caught my eye when I started to get to know you better in the different communities that we interact in is I noticed that you said someone struggling with substance use disorder. And whenever somebody uses such very specific language that is not necessarily like the common phrase or the common way of talking about something hard, you said you wanted to have an easy conversation about some things that are hard today. And I was like, man, let's do it. This is talking about, substance abuse and addiction and the effect that it might have if we're personally dealing with it, if we've got family members dealing with it. It is such a common struggle, but people pretend like it's really, really not. And so I was really excited to have you here because you do have such a beautiful way of approaching the conversation. So, yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. I'm here for it. Here for the words.
Let's do it. I'm here for the words. Yeah, me too. Girl after my heart. I love it. So, Lisa, I love asking entrepreneurs, why this? You could do anything. You've got a lot of experience. You could direct your energy anywhere. What is it about working with loved ones, especially on substance use disorder? I'm still getting used to the phrase, but I love it. I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's
a
a
mouthful for
great way to
sure.
put it.
Yeah.
But like, why this? Of all the things that you could focus on.
Yeah. Well, definitely did not start my life thinking this was the seat that I was going to be sitting in. But ultimately, over the course of, kind of our family's journey, I realized that there wasn't help for family members. And the help that was being offered to me as a mom and to our family as someone who loved somebody. My oldest son struggles with substance use disorder and mental health challenges. It wasn't sufficient. It was very shame driven or dismissive or directive. You need tos, a lot of you need tos and you shoulds. And it really just didn't settle with me as a mom. It didn't take into consideration that I was also impacted and that frankly, if I didn't want to necessarily admit to it at the time, but I also had a role in the illness and I played a role and I needed to learn how to play a different role. So I sort of show up and say, that I work in a way that I needed. I show up how I needed, and I couldn't find me. So I became who I needed when I was really at my lowest point.
Yeah, I love that, and becoming who I needed. And so, like, who is that? Who did you need?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about like, what is that? And I'm already picking up that it's certainly not you should,
No,
and
there's no
getting
you
up in your
shoulds.
face
There's no
about
you shoulds.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, I think it's what was missing in sort of in that lane of the families being impacted. There was one of two options for families. There was shaming and letting them know how they screwed this up and how they were doing things wrong. That's not helpful. That does not motivate people to want to do better for sure. And then the other piece of that was, basically older approaches of, you need to help yourself, step away from this, detach with love, which I viscerally disagree with that statement. And there's some value and some truth in that. Families get completely entangled and overwhelmed and hijacked by other people's behaviors. But what wasn't being offered was, how do I love this person that's really important to me? So either the way you're loving is bad, that doesn't feel good to particularly a parent, or get out and save yourself. And that doesn't feel good to a parent either. And I've created step back so that you can step back into this relationship, step back, do some work on yourself. How have I been participating in the behavior? How have I been loving in a way that isn't helpful? And how have I been impacted and need to take care of myself? And then being able to, I say, step in a different door. Like the door you were going into in this relationship was not working for you nor for them. It was working for the disease, but it wasn't working for the people. So can you step back into this relationship a different way? And I call it loving better, learning to love better. And that is, there's science behind it. It sits with people better. And honestly, they get on board. And it is a journey. It is their journey, which is why I call it parallel recovery. It's about sharing the burden of change in the disorder with the person whose sort of behaviors are talking the loudest because they're the scariest.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much that I love about this, because I even just think even more broadly about how people get recommended to handle relationships these days. It's so black and white. It's like, okay, you either are going to be, fully high pressure, be in somebody's face, or completely cut them out. And it's
Ah,
boundaries, but very
yeah.
unhealthy boundaries. And what I love about how you're framing this, and kind of that metaphor of the two doors, is that it's really about changing the pattern. It's changing the routine, and it's never throwing out the person. I think, in my opinion, in the world right now, there's far too much people throwing, of just like
Yes.
throwing the people out. And especially when you have stakes in the relationship, the mother and the child, or in the spouse, or even among friends and things like that, like to just throw or block a whole person out indefinitely, like as the final solution, just doesn't seem like the way. So I
Yeah.
love how you're approaching this. It's like it can't stay the same, but it also doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be different in a way that is out of congruence.
Yeah, 100%. If I like pare down, my message and my philosophy, and you're not wrong, Amanda. This is relational. This is not just with, really high crisis, behaviors. This is just relationships 101. But it's sustainability of you, right? Like how can you sustain this relationship that might be challenging because there's behaviors or characteristics or dynamics that are difficult, and connection. How can I connect to the person? You can't connect the person to the person if you don't create sustainability for yourself, and you can't. Honestly, if we're going to be honest, we can't create sustainability for ourselves if we disconnect from the person, if you actually love them.
Mm.
That's not, those two things don't make sense. And so the all or nothing mindset is really not sustainable, and it's not connected either. I mean, it's just not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very punitive, very just like,
Yeah.
I can see how, like, maybe why that might be, that people default to more of a punitive or an all or nothing or black and white, is because nobody talks about it. They don't talk,
Yeah.
like, based on your research, how common really is it for people to be struggling or affected by I'm still learning the term substance use disorder. Like, how prevalent is it?
Yeah. So according to, the National Institute of Health and the CDC, 46.3 million people in the US qualify for a diagnosis of substance use disorder. And one thing that's actually really great about substance use disorder diagnoses now, which I think this is an actually important thing to talk about, because people who are adults today, have a vision of, if you are somebody who has an addiction to drugs or alcohol, what that looks like. And it looks pretty bad. In 2018, the criteria changed from addiction or not addiction to a spectrum of mild, moderate, and severe. And so while that opened up diagnostic criteria for more people, it opened up help at an earlier stage. So, I mean, it would be ridiculous if we only diagnosed cancer at stage 4. Like, a lot of people would die. Yet we now diagnose cancer at stage 1. Why would we not diagnose another disorder at stage 1? And so substance use disorder is now diagnosable at a much sooner, less impacted place. And I really want people to hear that you don't have to have burned your life down to have a unhealthy relationship with substances and have a mild diagnosis that is really treatable and really able to get on top of before big major things happen. So I think that's one thing I want to say. But essentially, 1 in 12 people in this country are impacted by substance use disorder. And so I like to tell people, I don't like to tell it, but I kind of show up and say, this is not just in your community, this is on your doorstep. In your extended family, there is probably somebody impacted directly by an unhealthy relationship with substance use. And so you are in direct contact with somebody, and changing our language, changing our understanding, changing the way we communicate with those human beings can really impact their ability to get the help that they need.
This is so, so huge. And, so many things are made better by bringing a bit of nuance into the
Yeah.
discussion,
Yeah.
and starting to play in the gray. Because to your point, I think about any habit, any behavior. Okay, I'm gonna give one. It's not substance abuse, but it was an interesting thing. We busted our 12-year-old on sneaking screen time,
Right.
and he was accessing YouTube, and we were like, no, that's not great. But what we did is we actually looked at, because nerd, I went and I looked at the screen time profile for the app YouTube, and it was so interesting because like the first time he did it was like a short amount of time, and then he waited several days. The next time he did it, it was a little bit longer, and he waited a couple more days. And
Hmm.
then by the third, we caught him on the third week of this. He was very sticky. But by the time he got to the third week, he had quadrupled the amount of time per session and had done it nearly every day. And like that's how behavior
Yep.
is formed, right? And like that's how behavior is shaped. Undesirable behavior, obviously cut off his YouTube access and, retraining that behavior really early in the incident. But you can just like see it in the numbers of like how behavior adoption can change and pretty rapidly and pretty significantly. And
Yeah,
that's
it's a
without it
reward
necessarily even
center.
being a substance, right?
Yeah, there's a reward, right? Like, behavior that is reinforced is repeated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't really argue the chemicals, whether it's drugs or alcohol or screen time or, satiation from food or shopping or, whatever it is that can ultimately become unhealthy. I mean, none of those things have to be unhealthy from the beginning, but can ultimately become unhealthy. And what's really interesting too is there's so much research, this diagnostic change. There's so much research around like age of introduction, around the I'm going to use the word, and then I'm going to go back and explain it, genetic makeup of the brain, because there isn't a genetic marker for addictive behavior. However, there is genetic predisposition to certain brains having less control of that dopamine reward that we get from things, to include human connection. I mean, we get dopamine reward from all sorts of things, but unhealthy things, there are certain brains that are definitely more impacted. And really having those conversations younger, and it doesn't have to be a shameful thing. There's several really great books out there around particularly young people and understanding the predisposition that might be out there for those people. Happy to talk about that maybe at another time. But it's really an interesting thing. And if we can have conversations around, do you remember when we talked about YouTube and how that was, you just kept getting drawn into that? You can then have later subsequent conversations about, how your brain reacts to certain stimulus and it being something that you need to pay attention to as you get older and you have open more opportunities for other stimulus that might come in, to include drugs and alcohol, which can become really dangerous really quickly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love your framing of that, because I'm thinking about like, well, if you had a gluten sensitivity or if you're lactose intolerant, it's like, okay, I mean, like that's your biology. That's how it's geared. It doesn't mean that you have to have a low quality of life. It means that you need to be aware that maybe you have certain sensitivities to, or any other kind of allergy, right? You might have sensitivities to these things. And if we can have sort of a similar, more neutral emotional conversation about behavior and the behavior adaptation, that seems like a very empowering place to
It
start to
is.
really see some meaningful change. I love
Yeah.
that. So Lisa, I mean, I could seriously do 4 hours on this particular topic. It is such a deep one and it affects so many people. And, one of the reasons I was so excited to have you here is because entrepreneurs in particular, they tend to be those dopamine hunters, and behind the scenes, there's often a lot that particularly is affecting, entrepreneurs. So if somebody was like listening to this and they're like, I think I might have maybe more of a problem than I thought, or I don't know. Like, what would you say would be that signal that maybe they should explore substance use disorder? Who should they go to? What should they do next if they're listening to this and they're like, what if? What if I'm affected? What if somebody close to me might be affected?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's two lanes to that question, Amanda. One is like if you're personally feeling like I might be on the edge of an unhealthy relationship with my coping skills, particularly substances, because that's what kind of my pocket of bandwidth is, my zone of genius. I would say, open up a conversation with just your primary care physician, or if you see a therapist that is skilled in substance use, that would be really good. And not everybody is, but just kind of say, I'm curious. I wonder if the way I'm relating to substances and using them might be like on the edge of not healthy. And I want to open up a conversation. Just start a conversation. We're so afraid that, and I think because we've been conditioned that you're a bad person if you don't have control of this particular thing, that you are somehow morally bad. You're not. And even medical doctors are becoming more and more understanding and empathetic to the fact that that's not the case. It is a slippery slope to get out of control, and open up a conversation with that physician and see what sort of resources are out there for you. If you're an entrepreneur that is digging into your work because you've got some stuff in your family that you're maybe trying to avoid, or just, yeah, avoid, work through, work around, I would say reach out to me. Again, you reach out to any professional that has a current understanding, particularly of the family system and the involvement in addictive behaviors, because there is, in the last 15 years, it's really changed. And I would say even today, I'm shocked at how many people, professionals that I talk to, that still use really outdated language of shame and um, moral failing. So I'm happy to have a conversation about, how you can work through this with your person that you love in a way that's very motivational and empowering and connected and sustainable. Happy to have a conversation about what that looks like. But don't do it
Outstanding.
alone. It is very isolating. I think, in particular, mental health, the umbrella of mental health, is so isolating. It's not casserole worthy. People don't sign up to do a meal train when you're going through this. In fact, I would say that, when people find out you're going through this, they retreat for several reasons. They don't know how to show up for you good in a supportive way. And I think on some level, it feels like you can catch it, which you can't. And they want to separate because it's so uncomfortable.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I just really I want to encourage you to not do this alone. It is, like I said, 1 in 12 people in this country are affected. That means every single family is affected by this on some level.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so powerful and very helpful and never go alone. I mean, you've heard this a million times if you've been listening to the show, but now Lisa said it, so really don't, don't go alone. Lisa, if people wanted to keep up with you, what's the best way to do so?
Sure. My Instagram that's where I'm most active, parallel_recovery. Or you can find me on my website, lisakatonasmith.com, and love to have a conversation. Just reach out via DM or email anyway.
I love it. That's so good. And dear listener, we've got all of Lisa's links below in the show notes. So if you want an easy click, just, head down to the show notes and you'll be able to access them there. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Amanda. Loved the conversation.
Absolutely. And dear listener, if you love this, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss another episode. And if you have, like she said it, you know somebody who would probably benefit from this episode. So just grab the link, however you're listening to it, or if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and share it with your friend. Just send it to them on a DM or over text and just tell them like, what did you learn or what did you hear that you loved in the show? And that would be such a huge gift to your friend. And, if you want to give us a little gift while you're at it, a honest review, this 30 seconds to tell us what you think of the show makes a massive difference because it helps people to decide whether they want to spend time with us or not. And of course, we are always very grateful for those reviews. Thank you so much for joining us. And until we see you next time, make sure you do what matters.